What if you could fight cancer, not with big beams from the outside, but with a tiny radioactive seed? I'm talking something no bigger than a grain of rice, placed exactly where it needs to be. Well, that's what we're talking about today. It's a story of a really powerful, targeted therapy that takes the fight right to the tumor, literally from the inside out.
Okay, so let's break this down. On the one hand, you've got traditional external radiation, right? It has to blast through healthy tissue just to get to the prostate. But then there's brachytherapy. And here, the radioactive sources are placed inside the target. This means you're delivering a super concentrated dose that spares all the surrounding stuff, like the bladder and rectum. It's a totally different strategy, a real game changer.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with this whole idea of fighting cancer from within. Then we'll dive into the science of the seed itself and the blueprint for making it super precise. After that, we'll look at the hard evidence, what life is like after treatment, and we'll wrap up with a really interesting puzzle, what I'm calling the precision paradox.
Okay, let's kick things off. Section 1, Fighting Cancer from Within. How brachytherapy revolutionized treatment.
So the specific technique we're talking about is called low-dose rate brachytherapy, or LDR for short. And here's how it works. A physician implants dozens of these tiny sealed seeds, think of them like little radioactive grains of rice, directly into the prostate. And get this, they stay there permanently, just slowly giving off a low, steady dose of radiation over a few months. The whole idea is to zap the cancer cells right as they're trying to divide.
All right, moving on to Section 2, the science of the seed. We're talking microscopic challenges, but macroscopic solutions.
Okay, so this brings up a really crucial question. You know, if you've got maybe 100 of these tiny metal seeds packed super close together, what's to stop one seed from just blocking the radiation from the one next to it?
Well, that problem has a name. It's called the inter-seed effect. And believe it or not, the earliest models just kind of ignored it. But in the real world, the metal casing of one seed can totally absorb radiation from its neighbor. It creates this shadow, which could lead to cold spots where the cancer doesn't get the full dose. Not good.
Here's a perfect analogy for you. Think about streetlights on a foggy night. You want the whole street to be lit up, right? But each lamppost, it casts a shadow right next to the pole. The inter-seed effect is exactly the same idea. We're just swapping out light for radiation.
So the solution here is pretty brilliant. It's not just about planning where the seeds go. It's about the actual engineering of the seeds themselves. Different models are designed specifically to control this effect. The stuff inside them, we're talking silver, gold, titanium, it's all carefully chosen. It's a precise calculation to make sure that radiation dose is delivered exactly like it's supposed to be.
All right, that brings us to Section 3, a blueprint for precision and the evolution of planning.
You know, the journey to get this precise has been pretty remarkable. If you go back to the 70s, surgeons were placing these seeds basically by hand. Then in the 80s, we got transrectal ultrasound, or TRUS, which gave them real-time guidance. But today it's a whole new ballgame. We've got sophisticated 3D planning that creates an exact blueprint before the procedure even starts. So the modern process is this really tight four-step dance. First, they create a 3D map of the prostate. Second, a physicist comes in and makes a super detailed plan for every single seed, where each one goes. Third, the team in the operating room executes that plan, using real-time imaging to guide them. And finally, they do a post-implant scan to double-check that the dose is perfect. You see, every single step is built around accuracy and then verifying that accuracy.
Okay, Section 4, putting it to the test. Look, all this planning and physics is super impressive, but does it actually work? Let's see what the evidence says.
Let's just start with one number, 97.3%. In a major study looking at men with intermediate-risk prostate cancer, that was the 5-year success rate, using brachytherapy alone. To put that in perspective, that means for nearly 98 out of every 100 men, the treatment worked. That's incredible.
Okay, now for something really surprising. This comes from a recent Japanese study. You'd probably assume that adding external radiation on top of this would be even better, right? More is better? Well, for these intermediate-risk patients, they found the exact opposite. Brachytherapy by itself actually led to better cancer control and way fewer urinary and bowel side effects. Sometimes less really is more.
All right, let's move on to Section 5, the human side. Because beyond all the clinical data, what really matters is, what's life actually like after the treatment?
Well, that same big study we just mentioned, they asked the patients how they felt. And 4 years down the road, 93% said they were satisfied or extremely satisfied with their choice. So that clinical success we saw, it absolutely translates into a positive experience for the patient.
Now, of course, we have to talk about side effects. For urinary issues, about 7% of men reported having a moderate or big problem 4 years later. Now, that's definitely an increase, but let's flip that around. It means for 93% of men, it was not a significant long-term issue.
When you look at bowel function, the impact is even smaller. Significant problems only rose to just under 3%. And this really highlights that benefit of targeted internal radiation we were talking about right at the beginning.
Okay, let's talk about sexual function, because this is where we see the most significant impact. At the start, about 20% of men already had a moderate or big problem. 4 years after treatment, that number went up to about 30%. So look, that is a real and notable side effect. But it's also important to see the whole picture. It means about 70% of men did not report a significant long-term problem in this area.
And all of this brings us to our final section. And frankly, it's a real puzzle. I mean, given all this strong evidence, the high success rates, the high patient satisfaction, you'd expect this treatment to be more popular than ever, right? But it's not.
Just look at this chart. It shows the trend in the US. The use of brachytherapy hit its peak way back in 2002. By 2010, its use had been cut by more than half. And here's the crazy part. This huge decline happened before a lot of the really strong evidence we just looked at was even published. It makes no sense.
So, what gives? Why the decline? Well, the research suggests it's got nothing to do with the results. It's all about systemic issues. Things like fewer and fewer residents are being trained in how to do it. The reimbursement rates are lower than for other treatments. And its value just isn't being communicated well enough, especially when you've got shiny new technologies like robotic surgery grabbing the headlines. It just goes to show you the best treatment isn't always the one that gets used the most.
And that really leaves us with a much bigger question, doesn't it? I mean, the story of prostate brachytherapy is this amazing case study of innovation in medicine and physics. But it's also a powerful, almost sobering reminder that just having great clinical evidence, it isn't always enough. It really makes you stop and think. How do we make sure that the best scientific progress we make actually gets to the patients who need it the most?